as we return to Europe to see what's going on in the 20th century, we're going to begin with Matisse and the Fauves. Fauvism is the first major 20th century abstract style, and I am going to be defining it as a form of expressionism, which means distortion of line, shape, or color in order to convey an idea or a feeling that the artist holds. This is a movement, short-lived, 1905 to 1908, that is heavily influenced by post-impressionism. Post-impressionism is especially evident in this case in the influence of Gauguin and Van Gogh. Artists who use color to convey emotion, Gauguin especially, not always using color in a naturalistic way. And the post-impressionists generally tend to free art to reflect their feelings, their perceptions, their ideas. So they help to stimulate the 20th century development of Fauvism. The name itself, Fauves, means wild beasts, and that is a name that was given to the group as a result of a 1905 exhibition that was held in Paris. It exhibited works by the Fauve painters, especially under the generally considered to be the leadership of Matisse. The critics absolutely hated this. They thought it was terrible, and they considered the artists to be the wild beasts, particularly because of their brushwork, but also, as the critics would have said, uncontrolled use of color. The Fauves also tend to give us fairly simplified forms, very forceful designs, and paintings that tend to look spontaneous and rather exuberant. Returning to the idea of expressionism, most expressionist works tend to be filled with some kind of heavy message or feeling, pain, suffering, angst, not the Fauves. They bring with them a sense of joy, a sense of pleasure, and a sense of appreciation for this world. We are looking right now at 29-2. It's a Woman with a Hat. It was done in 1905 by Matisse, again considered to be the leader of this group. It draws on the very, very bold use of color by both Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh. It is a depiction of Matisse's wife. The pose of the lady is really rather conventional. It's a traditional half-length, and if you want to find it, you can find a triangle in there. But it is overwhelmed by the intensity of color and the very, very strong patches of brushwork that resonate and clash with one another, including the blue-green, it looks to me, line running down her nose with a touch of yellow on the tip of her nose. Characterized then by very, very rough brushwork. Using color for expressionism, in this case, very joyful, very pleasurable, and very comfortable, kind of displaying a joy of life, an appreciation for life. And that, I think, is typical of Matisse throughout his career. He also brings a sense of calm. If you look at the lady's face, despite all of the color and all of the brushwork, it has a very, very composed expression and a sense of serenity and calmness that is typical of Matisse. Okay. This is also a painting that shows, I think, Matisse's joy of life and his pleasures that he finds in life. Consequently, and it is 29-3, Harmony in Red, or the Red Room. It's one of Matisse's most famous compositions. Consequently, I have down by his name the term hedonist. A hedonist is someone who does enjoy the pleasure of life. And I think that Matisse truly did. His life, the pleasures that he takes in this life, are the pleasures, the simple pleasures of middle-class living, such as a cozy dining room with fruit on the table, almost certainly being arranged by a maid. Matisse, when he talked about his art, said that he would like it to be pleasurable and joyful, like an overstuffed chair that you would come home to, something that you would sink into and take pleasure in after a long day. And this painting might qualify for that. This is still Fauve. It is around 1908, the end of Fauvism, and it is filled with color. So much color that it becomes very flat, very decorative, very sumptuous, and it requires line to outline the table so that it can actually be separated from the background of the wall, causing everything to kind of vibrate with a joyful energy, but also bringing about a flatness, particularly in the area of the wallpaper and the tablecloth as they merge into one. One of the things that Matisse does in his paintings, which are carefully structured, is to repeat shapes as well as colors. The pattern of the tablecloth is echoed in the wallpaper behind, which unifies everything. The maid who is arranging the fruit bowl, her hair, the color of her hair, is picked up in the bread in the cane seat of the chair. And I think maybe the flowers that are in the image in the upper right of our painting. And I hesitate to say it is a view out the window because it is so flat. I can't really tell you if it's a window or if it's a painting hanging on the wall. The woman's hair, the shape of it, is also echoed in some of the objects on the table, as well as in the kind of cotton candy trees that Matisse has painted outside. This is a joyful picture, typical of Matisse, and it is a picture that resonates with the pleasures of middle-class life. Matisse, throughout his life, is going to remain a colorist, but he is going to tame it. He's going to tone it down, and we can see that in his Lady in Blue, which is on the right of the slides right now. This was done in the 1930s. After Fauvism, which technically ends in 1908, Matisse brings a greater order and keeps control of his compositions. This is a painted image that actually draws heavily on the works of Cezanne. And we are looking at two additional images to the left. One is by Cezanne at the top right, and the other is another image painted by Matisse in the lower right. I've placed them together because Cezanne is famous for bringing structure to his compositions and repeating forms to bring order and unity. With his Woman in Blue, which is the Cezanne upper left corner, you can see that the arms repeat the folded fabric on the bodice of the woman's dress. There is a line running through the dress that continues in the the shadow of the woman's face, upper part, and all of that is echoed in the woodwork behind, which is structured with verticals and horizontals. That kind of repetition and use of verticals and horizontals appears in the Matisse painting below and also in his much later Woman in Blue. The background in particular is gridded along with the paintings that decorate the wall, all creating very strong horizontals and verticals. In other words, Matisse is still working with color, but he is bringing a kind of a greater control to the organization of his composition, and he is toning down the overall intensity of his color as well as his brushwork. This is a depiction of a model who frequently posed for him, and it actually seems to be more about the dress that she's wearing, with billowing, curving sleeves that puff out and are echoed and repeated in the shape of the chair on which she is seated. You can see that Matisse has taken his paintbrush and flipped it to the tip of the end of the brush, where he's actually scraped lines through the wet oil paint on the surface to create the pattern, the gridding in the background wall, as well as the diagonal gridding that surrounds the chair on which the woman is seated. This overall brings order to Fauvism. He's also used the end tip of his brush to create the form of the sleeves of the woman. It's decorative, it's flat still, and it has an overall sense of design that is coherent and makes it a fairly successful picture. It's in the Philly Museum of Art. You can see it. Matisse was not concerned with naturalism or accuracy of detail, and I think you can tell that by looking at the hands of the woman, particularly the one that seems to be holding a string of beads. In turn, Henri Matisse became an influence on German Expressionism, along with the Post-Impressionists, particularly Van Gogh and Gauguin, and also Edvard Munch. So all of these figures who were forcefully using color, became very influential for the German Expressionists. Who are the German Expressionists? Well, there were lots of them, different groups. And they belong essentially to the first half of the 20th century in Germany. Their pictures tend to be emotionally charged, and they carry messages dealing with social change. Their styles vary, but they do reflect the problems, the tensions, and of course, obviously, World War I and World War II that are a part of German history. One of the major movements is the Blue Rider group that was housed in Munich. It lasted from 1912 to 1916. 1916 happens to be the death for Franz Marc, and I hope to remember to explain to you the significance of 1916. Franz Marc is one of, I think, the more approachable and the more charming of the Blue Rider artists, which also include Klee and Kandinsky. He focused on depictions of animals. These animals were very, very close to nature, closer than humans are to nature. And from Marc's perspective, they were more beautiful than humans. He created images that tended to be abstract, but at the same time captured the essence of the animals, their spirit and their closeness to the natural world. And I would suggest the rhythms of nature, because his animals often reflect the forms that we find in the natural world. His animals are always gentle. They're very sweet. And sometimes you get the feeling that you've entered a realm of magic when you look at his animals. The message that is behind his art is simply that the world of nature, the world of animals, is a purer place, a better place than the world in which we live. And what we should do is echo the patterns, the habits, and try and be like the animals in the natural world. The two images that we have on the screen are kind of introductions. The deer on the left, gentle, sweet creatures, one overlapping the other, but echoing the shape of the mountains behind. The curve of the deer's back is almost replicated in the curving form of the mountain. The one on the right, a series of monkeys coming down diagonally, filled with energy, filled with motion. If you look at the shape of the backs of the monkeys, they tend to be echoed and reflected in the landscape. The work that is in the upper right is generally called Blue Horses. It's one of Marc's most famous compositions. And again, I would like to suggest that it is a painting that shows animals living in harmony with each other and also animals living in harmony with nature. The rounded swelling forms of the animals, the horses, suggest the abundance, the vitality, and the vigor and the pulse that is in the landscape behind them. The backsides of the horses are echoed in the rolling nature of the hills in the distance. The two paintings that I have also tend to reflect Marc's symbolic interpretation of color. And I'm going to quote him for you. He believed that red represented matter, brutality, and heaviness. So if you look at the horses, the red refers to the land, to reality, to heaviness. It can also convey a sense of brutality sometimes in some of his paintings. We'll see that in a minute. For Mark also, and this is, I'm quoting him, blue is a color that is associated with the male principle, astringent and spiritual. Of yellow, brace yourself, ladies. Yellow for Mark was the color of femininity. It's a female color. It's filled with gentleness, joy, and sensuality. And I bring to you the Leaping Cow, the yellow cow of 1911. I think it's in the Guggenheim. It shows our happy cow, a yellow lady cow, leaping through the landscape with great joy. Again, the body of the animal, particularly her buttocks, tend to echo and be reflected in the shapes of the landscape behind her. Very, in many ways, idyllic images created by Franz Marc in hopes that there could be a better world. Unfortunately for Mark and the rest of Germany and the rest of Europe, that was not to be. This painting, 1913, which is a year before World War I, is figure 29.8 in our book. It's called The Fate of the Animals. And in this case, you can see the red used to represent violence as the forms, almost shattered forms, run through the composition and as if it's an apocalyptic vision. There are shafts of energy, shafts of earth, destroying everything and destroying the animals. This is a reflection of the art being produced by Blue Rider that was anti-war. It, of course, did not prevent the war, but it was a reflection of the art world reacting to the tensions and the artist's belief that we were marching towards a war, which does in fact begin in 1914. It also shows the influence of Cubism. As the forms are fractured in the composition, there is much that Franz Marc is indebted to for Picasso's work. He never like Picasso, he never lets go of his forms, and we can actually still find the blue deer in the composition. Franz Marc, returning to the date 1916, Franz Marc will be called to the front lines, and in 1916, he will become one of the victims of World War I. He will die at the Great Battle of Verdun, which we are going to reference again when we get to the origins of Dada coming out of Europe.